This country definitely knows a lot about revolutions. And some people in France are rethinking their political system. Again. A president with too much power, a deadlocked parliament, and throwing calls for radical change.
Il n'y a rien au-dessus du peuple souverain. Aucun monarque, aucune loi, autre que celle qui vient d'en bas du peuple.
Doubts about democracy itself are rising in France. A recent poll conducted by Ipsos showed that over 51% of French people believe that only a strong power can guarantee order and security. In that very same poll, 1 in 4 thought that democracy was not the best system of governance. Those stats are definitely worrying, especially as the French were one of the countries that first became democratic, and they are known for their violent protests that overturn almost any unpopular government decision. So how do we get to this point? And is France really on the verge of a 6th republic? Let's get into it. First, you have to understand that French politics doesn't follow your typical presidential or parliamentary system. It's a hybrid, a semi-presidential system. A bit of both worlds, which sometimes really means the worst of both. Here's how it works. 4 separate votes happen back to back. 2 for the presidency and 2 for the parliament. In 2022, Emmanuel Macron won the presidency for a second time. He led the first round with 28% and took the second round with a solid 56%. But, and this is a very big but, he failed to win a majority in the parliament, as his party only secured 245 seats out of the 289 needed for a majority. So yeah, that meant tough times ahead. And this is somewhat unusual. In France, it's very common for the president's party to win a large majority in the parliament also, generally backing the president, but sometimes also opposing him, in what's known as cohabitation. Either way, the system usually produces a clear governing majority, but this was not the case this time. And ever since, France has been in crisis. The parliament is split into 3 big camps: the NFP, a left-wing alliance of socialists, Greens and Progressive, Ensemble, Macron's centrist bloc, and of course the National Rally, the far-right party led by Marine Le Pen. Now, the country is notoriously bad at forming government coalitions, and all 3 major groups have been at each other's throats since the vote. So with a hung parliament and no working majority, Macron's government has turned to a controversial tool, Article 49.3. This article lets the government bypass a parliamentary vote and force through legislation, unless a no-confidence motion brings it down. Basically, pass the law unless you topple the government. And the French hate it. Over 70% of the population sees Article 49.3 as undemocratic. Yet by December 2023, Macron's government had already used it 23 times, including on big stuff items like the national budget and pension reform. It has really given the people the perception that the French president has king-like powers, which the French obviously reject. And to be fair, the French president does have a lot of power. Some of these powers include being commander-in-chief of the armed forces, having nearly total control over foreign policy, appointing the prime minister, and also firing the prime minister, and even instructing the prime minister to use Article 49.3 to pass laws without a vote. So yeah, as mentioned, that's quite a lot of power. So with all the problems France has been facing, and the anger over the so-called presidential monarchy brewing, there's been talk for a while now about a 6th republic. This push is especially strong from the far-left party, France Unbowed, led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, a veteran left-wing politician who ran for president in 2022 and came in 3rd place in the first round, just behind Marine Le Pen. And he's been calling for a complete overhaul of the political system. This new republic revolves around one big theme: reducing presidential powers, which, let's be honest, is the exact opposite of why the 5th Republic was created in the first place. There are a lot of reform ideas flying around, but the most common ones, mainly pushed by Mélenchon, focus on 4 key changes. First, scrapping Article 49.3 from the Constitution. Critics argue it's fundamentally undemocratic and a shortcut to authoritarianism that sidelines Parliament whenever it gets inconvenient. Second, shifting to a more parliamentary system where the real power lies with the Prime Minister, not the President. Third, establishing citizens' assemblies, randomly selected groups of everyday people who would come together to debate key national issues and, in some cases, trigger referendums. And fourth, banning the accumulation of political mandates, a classic French practice where politicians hold multiple offices at once. Think of François Bayrou, who has been both mayor of Pau and a government minister at the same time. Now, a highly controversial part of Mélenchon's constitutional vision is putting French law above EU law. He has a Plan A, Plan B strategy, which goes something like this. Plan A, try to renegotiate EU rules on competition, budgets, and trade. And if that fails, Plan B, where France would unilaterally disobey certain EU laws, especially neoliberal ones, like the 3% deficit cap or market liberalization. This could mean reasserting state control over key sectors, protecting public services, or even ignoring EU limits on public spending. He also rejects the current direction of EU defense policy. Mélenchon opposes EU militarization under NATO or US influence, and calls for a non-aligned European defense, one that's independent of the transatlantic agenda. Now, let's get to the fun part. Is any of this even possible? Let's look at the only real possible roadmap. Step 1. France unbowed needs to win the next presidential election in 2027. No other major party in France supports the Sixth Republic, so if Mélenchon doesn't win, the whole thing is probably off the table. Step 2. Once in power, Mélenchon proposes something bold, a citizen-led constituent process inspired by Iceland's attempt in 2011. Here, ordinary people, not just politicians, would be selected or elected to write a brand new constitution through public debate and open consultation. And then there's step 3. Once the new constitution is ready, it would need to be put to a national referendum. If the people vote yes, boom, it becomes law. And just like that, you have the Sixth Republic. But is it really that easy? And why is any of this so controversial? Well, simply put, it's unconstitutional. The normal procedure to amend the French constitution is laid out in Article 89. It requires approval by both the National Assembly and the Senate, followed by either a referendum or a 3/5 majority of both houses, meeting together in Congress at Versailles. But this is just a constitutional amendment and not a whole new constitution. And Mélenchon definitely wants a new constitution. He argues that the sovereignty of the people overrides all rules. Instead of following the official route, he wants to use Article 11, a clause meant for referendums on major economic, social, or institutional issues. The idea is this: a citizen-led constituent assembly would draft a new constitution, and the referendum would then return a yes. And voila, as mentioned before, this would welcome the French people to a Sixth Republic. And to be fair, there is some precedent for this. Charles de Gaulle used a very similar move in 1962 to change how the president is elected, and it worked. But the question is France in enough of a crisis today to justify that kind of leap, especially from a leader who simply doesn't enjoy overwhelming public support? Mélenchon obviously thinks yes, and he said it super plainly. If I'm elected, it's because the people want a constituent assembly. That's my mandate, and I'll carry it out. Very strong words, and here's what I think. Mélenchon's plan to rewrite the constitution is risky, and it could spark a constitutional crisis. Skipping official procedures raises serious questions about legitimacy, and some fear that a constituent assembly could be packed with political allies. And his vision for France, especially when it comes to the EU, is worrying. Pushing a national agenda above European law ignores the reality of the deeply interconnected system Europe operates in today. Rather than a revolution, maybe what France really needs is an evolution, because in today's Europe, stability and collaboration matter more than ever. Sure, reform is possible. Maybe it really is time to scrap Article 49.3. Maybe the president's power to appoint the prime minister should be rethought. But these changes can happen within the democratic and legal framework of the Fifth Republic. France probably doesn't need to blow up its institutions to fix them. And to be honest, an unstable France is the last thing the EU needs right now. Thank you so much for watching this video. And if you're curious about what a multi-speed European Union could look like, then check out this video here, where we break it all down. And to support us further, consider joining us on Patreon and vote on video ideas every week. Thank you so much to our presidents, Jan, Schauke, Kristin, Peter, HEVD, BJ, Unite Europe, Stefan, and Mr. Probot. See you in the next video.